So again, when we looked at all of these issues, one of the things that jumped out at us was just the extent to which many of our waters in Minnesota are impaired. I've just finished, along with my team, 19 comprehensive plans in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. I've done an awful lot of workshops through the years with communities as they looked at comprehensive plans, and one of the things that I have found is that one of the ways in which you can get people's attention in Minnesota is talking about water quality. This graphic and graphics like it have really been instrumental in getting people's attention about the fact that we really do have serious environmental concerns in Minnesota. One of the things that you come to recognize is that an awful lot of those areas where there are impervious or impaired waters are agricultural areas. And an awful lot of those areas really are graded, if you will, tilled right up to the streams with no opportunity for any kind of pretreatment. So some of the recommendations, regardless of land use across the state, are for opportunities to treat that runoff before it discharges. I said that water was one of those cross-cutting areas. One of the things that we've seen a lot of in the last 10 years are a number of innovations in terms of what I'll call generally innovative surface water management strategies, ways of treating runoff before it's discharged. Unfortunately, we don't have the scientific research to actually support changes in our regulations yet. And so what we find with developers is we say, do all of this great stuff with the porous pavers and the rainwater gardens and so forth, but oh, by the way, you still have to build the big pond and you still have to build the big pipes. And so one of the main areas of recommendation out of this study was to hurry up and fund the research necessary to give people credit for those innovative surface water management strategies. And just to connect the dots to greenhouse gases, if you look at that whole map of all of those impaired waters and think about what it would take to pre-treat all of that runoff before it discharges to storms, those are natural treatment systems. Those natural treatment approaches would have a substantial effect on reducing greenhouse gases. So we can, in fact, connect the dots there. So this is just some images of some of those approaches to runoff treatment that have yet to be formally acknowledged in terms of their benefit to the environment and therefore changes in regulations. Again, I'm trying to do this quickly, but a big part of what we were looking at with land use was transportation, and several of the other speakers have already talked about many of these things. Not surprisingly, one of the main transportation goals was to reduce per capita vehicle miles of travel through compact mixed-use development and multimodal and intermodal transportation systems, and a lot of that discussed in a great deal more detail. In addition to just those land use strategies, we also recommended strategies that would integrate long-range transportation planning with long-range planning for green infrastructure. If you think 50 years into the future and you really look at your natural resource systems and think about what are those patterns of natural resources, those connective corridors that you want to maintain over time, we need to look at that and support it and protect it as we plan those other corridors. So that's what the first slide on the left said, and the one on the right just says, as we build those transportation corridors, there's a number of ways in which we can design them to make them sequester carbon and so forth. So let me just end with a couple of what I hope are provocative comments that lead to our questions and answers. First of all, anybody who fails to connect the dots about the future we desire and the depths of our current economic crisis is delusional. We have a tremendous amount of momentum heading toward sprawling development patterns. We have something like 43,000 improved, developed, ready-to-go lots in our greater metropolitan area. Those are lots that are paid for, those are debts that are on the books, and that's a market that's going to have to be dug out of. The other thing I'll say is that, and I know that there's a number of people in this room who are thinking about legislative changes and thinking about ways in which we might make some improvements. My observation after being a participant in that and observing a number of those efforts is that I think an awful lot of them unnecessarily focus on ideology, blame, and parochialism. And I don't think we need to do that. I think that we can really hold up the benefits of doing better and avoid saying that if you live beyond this line, you're a bad person, and if you live inside this line, you're a good person, and so forth and so on. And I really do think that we've fallen into that pattern a number of different times. So if we're going to respond effectively to global climate change and not just the issues we've been talking about today, but also other social, economic, and ecological challenges, we're going to have to dramatically shift our development patterns to become much more compact. Several of the other speakers have said that. I think we know that at this point. We're going to have to significantly reduce our vehicle miles traveled. And I would suggest that we're going to have to fully embrace a comprehensive conservation ethic. There's nothing more conserving of our natural resources than compact development patterns. And finally, every time I get to talk these days, I follow the mantra or share the mantra, make it easier to do better. I'm a member of the Urban Land Institute and attended the fall meeting a couple of years ago in Chicago, where the mayor of Chicago talked about the Green Code. The Chicago zoning code is this Byzantine document that dates back to the 1940s, and it's got millions and millions of internal inconsistencies. So they basically said to the development community, you can either go through the old gray door, it's going to take 5 times as long and you pay your own way, or if you'd like to go through our green door and use our green code, it'll be much quicker, we'll waive your fees, and we'll actually bring somebody along to help you through that process. Well, guess what's happened? Making it easier to do better has resulted in more people using the green door. I suggest that if you really think about what we're going to need to do and listen to what was said here earlier, we're going to need to make it easier to do redevelopment. We just are. And as somebody who's participated in a number of high-profile development projects, redevelopment projects in Twin Cities metropolitan area, if you talk about a number of those that we would identify as the most successful, I would argue you can't do them anymore, given the changes that have happened in our tax increment financing laws, the changes in eminent domain, and so forth. So we can't even do what we used to be able to do, let alone respond to the challenges that are facing us today. I'll call to your attention and take just 30 seconds from my commercial at the end to call your attention to this Urban Land Institute program that's coming up on January 22nd, which focuses on that issue of what if it was easier to do redevelopment. We've asked 2 different teams of experts to come up with bold, out-of-the-box thinking about how they would make it substantially easier to do redevelopment in Minnesota. The final thing I'll say is this. We spend millions of dollars on environmental review in Minnesota. I do a lot of it. That's a good portion of my income. But the bottom line is we spend millions of dollars on doing review that does almost nothing to ensure a better environment. What I would suggest we ought to do is substantially streamline that process to identify higher standards. And if developers are willing to meet a higher standard, we ought to be able to cut 1 year or 2 years out of that process and substantially streamline it. I'm happy to report that many of the regulators in the state of Minnesota recognize that and are willing to participate in that. Thank you for your time.
We have a few minutes for questions and answers or comments, whatever you'd like, of any of the speakers. Yes?
I have a question on when you were talking. Thank you. Rick Olseen, I'm a state senator from north of the cities.
Hi.
When you were talking about California, and you said technology would not work them out of their greenhouse gas problem, but what about if they wouldn't have backed off of their 10% of their vehicles would be zero emission by, I think it was 2010, and then they backed off of that rule. What if they'd have kept that in place or increased that? Could they, via technology, then meet those standards?
I don't think so, no. The gap is too large between that red line and the blue line, and transportation contributes too much of the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it would help, but I don't think it would get them there. And that is the conclusion. There was a conference at which all of this was discussed, and at the end of it there was general agreement among the technical and policy types that they needed to reduce the amount of driving as well as improve technology. Other questions?
David Levinson, University of Minnesota. Hi. So a related question. 100 years ago, we went through a similar transition in response to environmental problems of surface and personal transportation. We moved away from horses and into the motor vehicle, and there wasn't at the time a desire to reduce the number of horse miles traveled. We instead saw the benefits of the new technology, and people rapidly over the next 10 or 20 years in the United States adopted the new technology, and by the 1930s, horses were fairly uncommon. And so this gets to the same question. Suppose that over the next 10 to 20 years, we actually did develop the technology that it would allow zero-emission vehicles